Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy el tema es analogía, analogies, y cómo este tipo de frase puede ayudarnos a comunicar con más claridad y más fluidez. So, hello from Medellín, yet another splendid afternoon here. So the theme of today is, or are, shall we say, analogies, how to use them and how they will help us. So let's be clear, what do you mean by an analogy, Graham? Well, really, it's kind of like a mental picture that you're going to paint for the person you're talking to when you're describing something in a way that we can talk about, well, this situation that's like this, and by describing the thing that's like it, it's an easier way for the other person to understand your point of view or the thing you're trying to express without you having to use technical language. Because one of the tricks that we can fall into, one of the traps we can fall into, is to translate literally what we want to say, and we can end up using words that are either very out of date, very academic, or otherwise too technical, that when we're talking to people particularly, we're just not understood, and people will say, what do you mean? Oh, I don't understand. What do you mean by that? Because there is a big difference between when we're talking to people and when we're writing to people, or if we're writing a book about something. Then we are allowed to use more complicated language, but when we're talking to people, we need to try and keep it simple. And one of the easier ways for us to do that when we're expressing our ideas or opinions is to use some form of analogy. So let's try and give you a couple of examples to understand that better. So if we're talking about, let's say something like economics or finance. Now we could get really confused with, cost of living increase has gone up by 2.3% this month, and that's a 6.5%, and you go, what are these numbers? That don't make sense to me. But if we give you a very clear picture that, look, at the beginning of the year, you could buy a dozen eggs for this amount of money, but right now, the same amount of money only buys you 10 eggs and not 12. Now you can see what they mean. It's got more expensive because now you're 2 eggs short. So by making that kind of analogy, effectively a picture you can see, it's much easier for people to understand what you're talking about than perhaps if you wrote it down and explained it as a percentage. Or to give you another example, you could say to someone, well look, do you remember that time? Yeah, that time when Barry was really upset because John crashed into his car? Yes. Do you remember how Barry reacted? Yes. Well, that's how your boss is going to react when he finds out you haven't filled in that report. Aha, now I understand. So it's an analogy. It's a picture of something else that people can relate to that shows them clearly what you're trying to express. So think about that. Don't necessarily always look to, I need to translate that exact word from Spanish into English. What will that give me? Or that phrase, because sometimes some of those phrases might translate well in the dictionary, but they might end up leaving your audience confused if you're speaking to them. So think about that. That's our challenge for today. So wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying yet another splendid afternoon as we have here. And since we're now about to play in the semi-finals, it remains for me yet again to say with great pleasure, Vamos Colombia! And until next time, cheerio.